I first noticed the subtle shift in my husband, Nate, 2 months before he finally walked out the door. It was in the little things: his reluctance to lock eyes with me when we talked, the way his phone screen was always tilted away, and of course, how he occasionally forgot to invite me to after-work drinks that previously he would have insisted I join. I kept these observations to myself. For years, I'd been told I was too sensitive, too quick to blame, especially by my mother, who believed her daughter was incapable of doing anything worthwhile without her meddling. In my heart, I knew something was wrong. My intuition doesn't lie, but I vowed not to act on suspicion alone. Instead, I watched and waited. Nate had always been charming: warm smile, pleasant conversation, and just enough self-deprecation to disarm the unwary. My mother, Cynthia, adored him, perhaps more than she did me. She never missed an opportunity to compare my perceived shortcomings to his shining excellence. It was an unspoken alliance between them that always left me feeling cornered, as if I were intruding in my own home. The final blow came via text. I remember it clearly because it popped up as I was sipping coffee one Saturday morning, trying to finalize a graphic design project. My phone buzzed. A short, clinical message that changed everything. "I'm moving my stuff out. Don't try to stop me. I'll be gone before you're back from your mother's birthday dinner. It's pointless to continue this marriage. Nate." My hands trembled for a heartbeat, just enough to cause a brief ripple in my coffee mug. The ground I stood on felt unsteady, but I kept my face calm. This was it. An explicit confirmation that the man I'd married had finally decided to cut me loose, and that he'd chosen the day of my mother's birthday dinner to deliver the blow. Typical Nate, always with a sense of theatrical timing. I let out a single sigh, then placed my phone back on the table. Instead of calling him or sending him a flood of desperate texts, I simply finished my coffee. I knew I had to pace myself. This fiasco was only beginning. I had plenty of work to keep me occupied, but my thoughts drifted as I polished off an email to a new client. My mind lingered on the hidden preparations I had made over the last couple of months. I had suspected something was brewing. Nate had gotten sloppy with his so-called business dinners, which he'd attend without receipts or coherent stories. And I'd felt that eerie sense of a storm gathering, the prickling at the back of your neck when you realize you might be in danger. Those instincts told me I should protect myself. So I started saving money in a separate account under my business's name. I also secretly recorded conversations with him, a precaution I never imagined I'd actually need, but my lawyer friend had insisted it was legal in our jurisdiction to do so without his knowledge. The final stroke had been paying close attention to certain bank statements. There were small but telling withdrawals. He'd been siphoning money from our joint account, believing I wouldn't notice $200 here, $300 there. Over time, it added up. I also uncovered, through some discreet digital snooping, that my mother had been egging him on. In an email that had accidentally synced to our home office computer, I read lines like, "You deserve better. She's always been difficult. You've done enough. Let her face the consequences." The collaboration between Nate and my mother stung, but didn't exactly surprise me. She had always criticized me, teased me in front of extended family, and made every success of mine feel like an accidental fluke. In the end, I decided I wasn't going to bury my head in the sand. I played along, acting my usual self, docile in front of my mother, patient with Nate, while building my own safety net. It felt like living a double life, but the alternative was letting them walk all over me. If they had sought to betray me, I would deliver the final twist. Still, I never openly confronted either of them. Not yet. I wanted them to be overconfident. When the day of my mother's birthday dinner arrived, I dressed nicely and took extra care with my makeup. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled or unprepared. The restaurant had been chosen by my mother. An ostentatious place with starched white tablecloths and a staff that sniffed imperiously each time you asked a question. I wasn't surprised to see Nate was running late. Actually, I doubted he'd show at all. He had, after all, announced via text that he was leaving me, but I had expected my mother's reaction to my apparent solo arrival. The moment I stepped into the private dining room, she pressed her lips into a thin line. "Where's that handsome husband of yours?" she asked, loud enough for all to hear. Her friends, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few longtime family acquaintances, turned to look at me, some with mild concern, most with raised eyebrows waiting for any sign of weakness. I put on a polite smile. "He's been delayed," I said. "Something came up at work." I saw the glint in her eyes, a predator that had found its wounded prey. "Ah, I see. No matter. Though we'd all love to see him, he's always such a delight." She forced a laugh, and the rest of the table joined in, politely but without warmth. Over drinks, people swapped stories. My mother recounted how, as a child, I'd once drawn on the living room walls with crayons. An amusing anecdote that had grown stale in its repetition. She always found a way to weave my childhood embarrassments into public conversation. Then she moved on to talk about how proud she was of Nate's recent success. He'd closed a deal with a real estate group. Nobody looked in my direction, presumably because anything I'd accomplished paled in comparison. Nate finally walked in, as if on cue, halfway through the soup course. He looked unruffled, wearing a smug half-smile. Instinctively, I knew the duffel bags in his trunk were probably loaded with his belongings, ready to drive off after the dinner ended. He greeted my mother with a warm hug, oddly warmer than the obligatory peck he placed on my cheek as he slid into the seat next to me. My mother's eyes sparkled with malicious delight, and my stomach twisted in anger. Conversation resumed, focusing mostly on others. For the first half hour or so, I quietly sipped my soup and listened, but my mother couldn't let me be for too long. She never did. Halfway through the entrees, she leaned back in her chair, stared at me across the table, and announced, in that dramatic tone she'd perfected, "I have to ask you, dear daughter, why are you even here? You're nothing. Nate is making something of himself. Your cousins are all doing brilliantly, but you keep floating around doing, well, who knows what." Everyone laughed. The volume of it nearly made me flinch. Even Nate wore a twisted grin, though I suspected it wasn't about my mother's words so much as the impending satisfaction of seeing me humiliated on this special night. I took a moment to blot my lips with a napkin, carefully placing it back on my lap. I stood quietly, lifting the document envelope I'd brought with me. A hush fell over the table as I moved around, stepping behind my mother's chair. I carefully slid the envelope across the table, directly in front of her. She stared at it, confusion furrowing her brow. Then she must have caught the name of my lawyer's firm printed on the top. Her face went pale. The rest of the table shifted, trying to see. Nate shifted too, clearing his throat nervously. "It's too late," I said softly. Those 3 words cut through the silence like a knife. My mother snatched up the document and flipped through the pages. I could see the betrayal etched on her face, and my heart pounded in a strange mix of anger and vindication. This was it. The moment I had quietly, methodically prepared for. Those pages contained a comprehensive legal statement. It detailed the evidence I had gathered, the secret emails that showed my mother's involvement in undermining my marriage, the bank statements showing questionable withdrawals by Nate, the recordings I'd made of his confessions that he was funneling money away, coached by my mother to leave me high and dry. Everything was spelled out with pristine clarity. Also included were instructions on my next steps, the freeze I'd placed on the joint account, how I had effectively cut off access to the rest of my assets, and a pending lawsuit for the funds he had already siphoned. Nate's mouth hung open. He looked as though the floor had dropped out from under him. My mother opened her mouth several times, but no words came. The rest of my extended family gawped, uncertain how to react. I quietly walked back to my seat, sitting down with measured calm. "I believed you both wanted to humiliate me, see me suffer," I said, meeting Nate's gaze, then shifting to my mother's. "But if you think I haven't been paying attention, you're sorely mistaken. The question now is, why are you here?" Silence clung to the air like a heavy fog. I set my napkin on the table. My mother's lips trembled, but she couldn't seem to form a coherent sentence. Nate's eyes darted around, looking for an ally, for some support, but found none. Nobody was laughing now. I gathered my things. Before I left, I looked down at my mother, still clutching the papers. "You might want to find a better hobby than trying to sabotage your own daughter's life, because you've lost this round." I turned on my heels and strode out of the restaurant. It was the single most triumphant moment of my life. Nate, with all his overconfidence, had hardly seen it coming. My mother had convinced him I was too fragile to handle the blow, that I would crumble and beg him to stay. She had no idea just how resilient her nothing of a daughter had become. I walked out into the cool night air feeling lighter than I'd felt in a long time. The documents were only the beginning of their downfall. Nate had gloated for months about his real estate ventures and how he planned to leave me in a financially precarious position when he walked out the door. According to his texts, I was meant to be scrambling to cover rent and the bills as he sauntered off into the sunset. But those illusions shattered the moment he realized that I'd restructured my finances. Not only did he not have access to our joint account anymore, he was also facing legal ramifications for the money he'd already diverted. Within weeks, calls from lawyers and banks inundated him. He was forced to meet with my attorney, who laid out exactly how precarious his position had become. My mother, still harboring illusions that she could rescue him from the mess, tried hiring a high-powered lawyer friend. It backfired spectacularly. The evidence was too damning. Screenshots, text messages, audio recordings. The friend advised them to settle and keep things quiet, but it was already too late for that. News spread among friends, and soon my extended family got wind of the entire fiasco. Cousins I barely spoke to reached out to apologize for going along with my mother's open ridicule at dinners and gatherings. They confessed they had always suspected she treated me unfairly, but they didn't realize the extent of her cruelty. Some tried to paint me as ruthless for exposing my mother so publicly. To those individuals, I pointed out that I had never intended to ruin her reputation. She had done that herself. I merely chose not to be her scapegoat anymore. Financially, Nate's downfall came swiftly. His real estate partners, discovering the drama and potential legal suits, distanced themselves. He lost a major contract for ignoring professional standards. Word got around that he was unreliable, using shady personal maneuvers. In real estate, reputation is everything, and a whiff of scandal was enough to tank his prospects. Socially, he faced just as much humiliation. The mutual friends who once championed him for his charisma began to see the cracks in his persona. Some believed he had always been that way, but was adept at hiding it. Others simply didn't want to be associated with the negativity. He found himself more isolated than ever. My mother, on the other hand, tried to maintain her public facade, yet whispers at her country club became more frequent. Her longtime friends began to avoid her once they realized she was the master orchestrator of her daughter's betrayal. One day, about 3 weeks after the dinner, I found a note in my mailbox. It was from my mother in her familiar angular handwriting. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. Call me." I set the note aside. Part of me wanted to confront her again, but I also knew that any discussion would spiral into her controlling the narrative. I decided not to call. She was reaping what she had sown. Meanwhile, life began a slow but steady climb for me. At first, it was just a sense of relief. I no longer had to tiptoe around a spouse who treated me like an afterthought or a mother who undermined my every move. Despite the chaos, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. I'd been working freelance as a graphic designer for a few years, but after the divorce papers were filed and I made my settlement demands, I found more energy to focus on my business. I rebranded myself, updated my portfolio, and started pitching to bigger clients. Remarkably, I landed a contract with a boutique hotel chain that needed a comprehensive visual overhaul. It was a dream project, one that would pay me handsomely and bolster my reputation in the industry. The hours were long, but for the first time in a while, I was doing work that felt fulfilling. I threw myself into every detail: new color schemes for their marketing materials, a dynamic logo that could be adapted to multiple properties, and website mock-ups that would simplify the guest experience. The chain's CEO was impressed with my professionalism, especially how calmly I handled last-minute changes. "What's your secret?" he asked me once, observing my unflappable demeanor. I just shrugged and smiled. "I've learned not to let people take advantage of me." With the influx of work, I decided to move to a new apartment, something modest but airy, with large windows and a cozy office nook. It was entirely in my name, funded by the money I'd saved in my separate account and the new project contracts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel overshadowed by a partner or belittled by a parent. I was making my own decisions about furniture, decor, and living arrangements without anyone else's input. I refused to let bitterness consume me. While it might have been tempting to revel in Nate's humiliation, I tried to focus on my growth and independence. That was my real revenge. Still, poetic justice has its charms, and I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing the occasional update of how he was floundering. Once, I bumped into a former colleague of his at the grocery store. The colleague tried to tiptoe around the subject, but eventually I found out that Nate had left the real estate firm he helped found. He was facing an internal investigation for the funds he might have misused there. I didn't have details, but the colleague gave me a knowing look. My guess: once a person starts dipping into accounts in a marriage, it's not a stretch to suspect other questionable behaviors in business. By the time my mother's next family dinner came around, this time a Thanksgiving gathering, I had no intention of attending. My phone buzzed with texts from aunts and cousins, urging me to come. Some even apologized for laughing at my mother's jabs, admitting they hadn't known the full story, but I was done playing the role of the scapegoat. I politely declined, deciding I'd spend Thanksgiving in a small gathering with friends who actually liked me. However, a few nights before Thanksgiving, there was a knock on my new apartment door. To my surprise, my mother stood there, wearing an expression I'd never quite seen on her before, something between contrition and desperation. She looked smaller somehow, as though all her usual bravado had been drained. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I wasn't sure what to say, so I stepped aside and let her enter. She glanced around the apartment, taking in the minimalist decor and the boxes I still hadn't fully unpacked. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Nice place," she finally ventured, her eyes scanning the walls. "Simple, but it suits you." I folded my arms, unconvinced by the cautious compliment. "Why are you here, Mom?" She sighed and sank onto the edge of my couch, where a few throw pillows lay haphazardly. I wanted to apologize," she began. The words sounded foreign on her lips, as though she'd rehearsed them, but they still wouldn't come out quite right. "Things have spiraled out of control, and I think I've lost sight of what matters." It was the closest to contrition I'd ever heard from her. I took a seat in an armchair across from her. "I'm listening." She stared at her hands. "I felt left behind, perhaps? You were going your own way. Nate seemed so sure of himself, so eager to do something grand. I thought, if I could push the two of you together, maybe you'd be more like the daughter I always wanted. But I realize now I was meddling. More than meddling. I was cruel." I didn't speak. A part of me wondered if she was lying, if she was just here because she was now socially isolated, but there was a tremor in her voice I'd never heard before. "I've lost respect in our family. They look at me like I'm some sort of monster for humiliating you in public," she said. "My social circle is whispering about how I encouraged a husband to steal from his wife. It's a scandal. My friends, well, they aren't really talking to me right now." A bitterness rose in my chest. Now she was facing consequences, so she came crawling? I forced myself to stay calm, to remember how she'd orchestrated the plan to tear my life apart. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. "You made your bed, Mom." She winced. "I know, and I'm sorry." She paused, lifting her gaze. "Can you ever forgive me? Maybe we can start over." I studied her for a long time, weighing the sincerity of her words. Then I realized, whether she was truly sorry or not didn't have to dictate my life. I could accept her apology or not, but in the end, I was in control of my future. If she wanted to make amends, she would have to do so through her actions, not just words. "I'll consider it," I replied carefully. "But you need to understand I'm not the same person you're used to insulting. You can't just barge into my life and expect me to jump." My mother nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I'll go now." She rose from the couch and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned to look at me one last time. "I truly am sorry." As the door shut behind her, I exhaled deeply. Forgiveness was a tricky thing. I suspected it would take a lot more than a single conversation for me to trust her again, but that was fine. I had no interest in returning to the status quo. Over the next few months, I found new strength in my professional success. My design project for the boutique hotel chain was a hit, garnering glowing reviews from marketing blogs and a loyal wave of new clients. The financial stability let me hire 2 junior designers to help me, forming a small but efficient creative team. We worked from a co-working space downtown that was buzzing with entrepreneurs, coders, and artists. It was a far cry from the stifling environment I had inhabited under Nate's watchful, skeptical gaze. My personal life slowly expanded too. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I attended networking events and even found the courage to sign up for cooking classes. Something I had always wanted to try, but had never done because Nate wasn't interested. My new independence felt exhilarating. Every so often, news of Nate's spiraling fortunes reached my ears. He had to sell his sports car to pay off some debts, and rumor had it that his credit was trashed. I heard he'd tried to latch onto a new venture, but no one who was aware of his legal troubles wanted to partner with him. The rest of his life, it seemed, was one long cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. But I rarely indulged in celebrating his misfortune. There was a quiet sense of closure whenever I thought of him. He had done me wrong, and I'd responded by carefully, deliberately protecting myself. If anything, I was relieved that I hadn't let him tear me apart emotionally. I had done what was necessary. As for my mother, she made some attempts to rebuild a relationship. She invited me to a small holiday brunch a few months after our conversation. Only a select handful of family members were present, and the environment was noticeably quieter, more subdued. She never uttered an unkind word or humiliating joke about me. In her own stumbling way, she asked about my latest projects, though she didn't quite know how to express genuine pride. I appreciated the effort, even if I remained cautious. I realized something important that day. Revenge isn't always about destroying the other person. It's about not letting them destroy you. I had protected my future with quiet strength, stepped out of my mother's imposing shadow, and refused to crumble under Nate's betrayal. That was all the retribution I needed. Late one afternoon, after I finished a meeting with a new client, I treated myself to a walk by the waterfront. The sun dipped low, casting a golden shimmer across the water. I paused by a railing, letting the breeze ruffle my hair. In that moment, I reflected on just how far I'd come. A year ago, I had been caught in a web of my mother's belittlement and my husband's secret deceptions. I'd felt small, worthless, helpless. But rather than lash out blindly, I had chosen to be strategic. I'd gathered my evidence, protected my assets, and refused to break under the weight of their manipulation. In the end, they had both realized their mistake too late. My mother's social standing crumbled, and Nate's finances and reputation crashed and burned. Poetic justice delivered itself, the conspirators undone by their own overconfidence. Now I was no longer nothing, if I had ever been. Standing there with the wind in my hair, overlooking the shimmering water, I felt a profound sense of triumph. My life was my own. My identity, my career, my happiness, none of it hinged on their validation or acceptance. That was my victory. And quietly, I savored every second of it.